Movie sets can be pretty gossipy places, with rumors that get out into the wild. Sometimes they're not exactly true. These are myths and legends you may have heard about these movies and TV shows, but shouldn't believe.
J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings remains a full-on cultural phenomenon, with movies, video games, comic books, and even new novels coming out all the time. But while you might think you know everything there is to know about elves, orcs, and hobbits, some of that might not actually be accurate. Here are some false facts about the Lord of the Rings you always thought were true. Perhaps the biggest misconception regarding the world of Middle-earth is that hobbits are, as a race, pretty weak. Sure, the 4 main hobbits each get heroic moments, but they're treated like outliers. In the books, though, there's another ending we don't see in the movies, where a depowered Saruman conquers the Shire, and we get to see the true mettle of the hobbit race. Led by Merry, Sam, Frodo, and Pippin, the hobbits free themselves and slaughter a whole army of ruffians sent against them. Turns out all those extra breakfasts made them pretty strong. Some fans believe that Samwise Gamgee is little more than a source of comedic relief. It's understandable, given Sean Astin's charming performance, which was filled with meme-worthy moments about potatoes and sharing the load. But the most badass Samwise moment is one that's all too easy to overlook. When Sam thinks Frodo has been killed by Shelob, he takes the ring and prepares to finish the quest alone. That would be heroic enough, but when he finds Frodo alive, he simply hands the ring back over. It may not sound like much, but he's pretty much the only character who is able to resist the ring's temptation. Even Gandalf refused to take the ring because he knew he'd be corrupted.
Don't tempt me, Frodo. I dare not take it. Not even to keep it safe.
And Frodo himself gave in to the ring at the end, only finishing the quest because Gollum bit his finger off. Samwise? He doesn't seem tempted at all, just scared of how the ring affects everyone else. That makes Sam more than just, well, this.
Potatoes. Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew.
One of the many endings in the Return of the King movie shows Frodo and Gandalf taking a fateful boat trip. They're heading off to Valinor, the legendary heaven on Middle-earth, where the gods live in harmony with their immortal children, the elves. Heading to Valinor or staying with Aragorn was the choice Arwen had to make, remember? So you are justified in assuming that getting to heaven is probably a pretty difficult thing to do. But in fact, it's pretty much as easy as just building a boat and sailing there, which is exactly what Legolas and his hetero life partner Gimli do in the books in order to join their departed friends. That doesn't seem so hard. Fans of the film can be forgiven for thinking that when you lose the One Ring, you instantly age. After all, Bilbo seems hale and hearty during his birthday celebration at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, but when we see him at the end of Return of the King, he's a shriveled old man. But, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. After all, Gollum has been alive for centuries thanks to the ring's power, surviving for several decades after losing the ring to Bilbo. The ring doesn't age you, it extends your life. So why does Bilbo look so feeble after giving up the ring? Well, turns out the movie forgot to mention the simple fact that there's actually a 20-year gap between the opening and closing scenes of the trilogy. So Bilbo's aging is simply due to the natural passage of time. Thanks for confusing everyone, movie. Among die-hard Lord of the Rings fans, there are 4 words almost guaranteed to inspire blind rage. Elves at Helm's Deep. This, of course, was a major part of the climax of the Two Towers movie, with a small company of elves arriving to help the humans drive off a huge army of invading orcs. But not only is this not in the books, it runs directly counter to one of the main themes of the books, which is the decline of elves, who are sailing off to Valinor and leaving the affairs of the mortal world behind. Frankly, if the elves cared enough about the world to get involved at Helm's Deep, they probably could have prevented Sauron's return in the first place, only they weren't really paying any attention. If it weren't for Sauron being a giant eyeball, the internet would never have had one of its more enduring and beloved memes. But that whole giant eyeball thing is a creation of Peter Jackson, who used it to make the implicit threat of Sauron more explicit. In fact, while Sauron doesn't physically show up in the books either, Tolkien's letter indicated that Sauron did, in fact, have a physical form at the time of the Return of the King. We don't know exactly what he looked like, but chances are it was less like a giant eyeball and more like, Michael Fassbender or something. Thanks to Viggo Mortensen and the face that launched 1,000 fanfics, it's easy to take Aragorn's age at face value. After all, Mortensen was 43 years old when Fellowship of the Ring came out, and it seemed a reasonable age for a seasoned warrior who can still kick major butt. However, the character of Aragorn is actually nearly 90 at the time of the movies, eventually living to be 210 before passing away in super slow motion. Of course, this wasn't really discussed much in the movies, though a deleted scene from Two Towers pretty much explains the whole thing.
You are one of the Dunedain, a descendant of Numenor, blessed with long life. It was said that your race had passed into legend.
There are few of us left. The Northern Kingdom was destroyed long ago.
When Faramir captures Frodo and Samwise and almost delivers them to his creepy dad, it kind of makes sense, because after all, he is Boromir's brother, and Boromir was seduced by the dark side of the Force. No. But as fans of the books well know, Faramir is actually nothing like his brother. In the original story, Faramir figures out what Frodo and Sam are doing, and rather than taking the ring and turning them over to his exceptionally creepy dad,
Come, sing me a song.
Faramir actually helps them on their journey, and isn't tempted by the ring at all. Thanks to Peter Jackson though, tens of millions of viewers think Faramir is just another jerk. One of the most powerful and progressive moments from Return of the King is when Éowyn the Shield Maiden defeats the Witch King. The Witch King feels pretty confident because of a prophecy that basically says no man can kill him, at which point Éowyn does the most epic of mic drops.
I am no man.
It's a powerful moment, but if you think she won just because she's a woman, you're wrong. It was actually because she had a ton of help from Merry. Before Éowyn gets her awesome killing stroke in, audiences see little Merry stab the Witch King with his blade. The movies gloss over the importance of these blades, with Aragorn simply handing them out at Weathertop. Tolkien, however, made clear that these blades were forged by the Rangers years ago with magical enchantments specifically made to hurt the Witch King. In the books, Merry stabs the Witch King with one of the only weapons that can hurt him, opening the door for Éowyn to complete the prophecy. Okay, everyone in the entire world seems united by one thing, wondering why the heck the Ring Gang didn't just ride those giant eagles into Mordor in the first place! But this question has already been answered if you pay close attention to the plot. The whole reason they sent a tiny group to destroy the ring in the first place is because Sauron is constantly watching everything.
One does not simply walk into Mordor. Its black gates are guarded by more than just orcs. There is evil there that does not sleep. And the Great Eye is ever watchful.
So while a couple teeny tiny hobbits might go unnoticed, a flock of massive eagles would have been really obvious, and easy prey for Nazgul and their fell beasts. The eagles were only able to fly in after Sauron was defeated. Question answered, internet.
Okay, so Gandalf is actually technically a wizard, but he's not the kind you might be used to. He's not a wizard in the sense that, say, the kids at Hogwarts are wizards. He didn't show aptitude for magic as a child and go to wizarding school and learn spells from a dusty old book. No. Gandalf is less of what you consider a wizard and more of what you'd consider a demigod. The Valar are essentially the pantheon of gods in Tolkien's universe. It was they who sent Gandalf to Middle-earth from Valinor along with Saruman, Radagast, and two other wizards who never really showed up in any of the books.
And the aptly named Sir not appearing in this film.
These wizards originally existed as beings called Maiar, who acted as servants to the Valar. Before being sent to Middle-earth, they were made to look human and given magical and physical abilities beyond those held by normal men or even elves. They had existed on Middle-earth for thousands of years prior to the events of The Lord of the Rings as well, hence why they're so knowledgeable about the world. Gandalf's status as Maiar is also why he's resurrected after his fight with the Balrog. It's not some wizard spell which brings him back, but the will of the Valar themselves. In Peter Jackson's Return of the King, Denethor is portrayed as a vengeful and cowardly madman who acts largely as an antagonist to Gandalf and Faramir during the Minas Tirith storyline.
Authority is not given to you to deny the return of the king, steward.
Rule of Gondor is mine!
In the novel, however, Tolkien makes it clear that Denethor wasn't driven mad by a lust for power or fear of war. Instead, Denethor was tormented by an outside influence, a Palantir. The Palantir are the magical orbs once used by the elves as a means of communication and wielded in The Lord of the Rings by Sauron, Saruman, and Denethor. Prior to the events of the trilogy, Denethor had begun using his Palantir in an attempt to ferret out information which he could use in the war against Sauron. Instead, Sauron's own influence on the Palantir slowly drove him mad. The notion that Denethor lost his mind trying to save his people brings a whole new level of tragedy to his character, something which is never really made clear in Peter Jackson's trilogy. Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Lord of the Rings might give you the impression that Gondor and Rohan were the only flashpoints in the end stages of the War of the Ring, but this is far from true. The reality is briefly alluded to in the extended edition of Return of the King, but the movie leaves out most of the details.
Your kinsmen may have no need to ride to war. I fear war already marches on their own lands.
The appendices to The Lord of the Rings make it clear that while Sauron's army was laying siege to Minas Tirith, the elves, dwarves, and other men of Middle-earth were attempting to defend their own lands against invasion. Sauron's armies at Dol Guldur attempted to invade Galadriel's realm of Lorien 3 times, but failed. Meanwhile, Thranduil, king of the Wood Elves, was waging a largely successful war against the orcs in Mirkwood. The men of Dale weren't quite as lucky. Sauron's armies attacked the city during the Third War and thoroughly overwhelmed its defenders. The survivors took shelter in the Lonely Mountain with their dwarven allies and just barely held out under siege before the ring was finally destroyed. King Brand of Dale, the grandson of the hobbits Bard, was killed during the battle, as was the dwarven king Dane Ironfoot. At some point in time, it became an unquestionable fact that hobbit feet aren't just hairy and tough, but are also disproportionately large. The truth is, however, that Tolkien never wrote anything about hobbit feet being particularly big. In the Fellowship of the Ring, hobbits are described as having tough, leathery soles and being clad in a thick, curling hair, but no mention is made of their size. Sean Astin, who plays Samwise Gamgee in Peter Jackson's movie adaptations, appears to have been in favour of a more faithful interpretation of hobbit feet. On the special features for the extended edition of The Fellowship of the Ring, Jackson revealed that Astin, frustrated at the time it took to apply the hobbit's foot prosthetics, kept him up to date on his personal tally of how many days the prosthetics were applied versus how many days the feet appeared in shot.
South Park has been lampooning politics and pop culture for 2 decades now. In that time, plenty of misconceptions and myths have appeared about the show. Here are the real stories behind some South Park myths. Now we can all claim to have learned something today. You'd think that with the show's knack for mocking literally everybody, few advocacy groups would support South Park, even if they weren't made fun of that week. As it turns out, quite a few prominent groups representing people who have been lampooned by the show have actually praised it for being fairly even-handed. For example, the Tourette Syndrome Association credited the episode La Petite Tourette, which features jokes about Tourette syndrome, for raising awareness and getting aspects of the condition factually correct. Likewise, a group linked with the NAACP lauded the episode, with apologies to Jesse Jackson, for airing uncensored racial slurs and portraying the impact that they have in context. Even people of the Jewish faith, possibly the most mocked group in the show's history, have repeatedly supported the show.
And you especially can't say anything about Jews. Oh, Jesus, why'd you just cut off my bar?
Organizations have praised the show for both its nuanced portrayal of the kind of accepted anti-Semitism Jewish people face daily, and sometimes just because, like everyone else, they find it funny. And when the show mocked Kanye West's ridiculous ego with a running joke that he enjoys relations with male fish, West actually didn't mind the episode.
Hey man, I'm a genius, alright? I'm the most talented musician in the world. If I was a homosexual or a fish, I would know.
He responded on his blog that he found the episode hilarious, in all caps too, so you know he was being super serious. West thanked the show for helping keep his ego in check, gave the animators a special shout out for taking the time to faithfully animate his crew, and admitted that he totally understood why people felt that way about him. And Kanye West never did anything stupid or egotistical ever again. Yeah, just kidding. South Park has a unique animated style, owing to the fact that the show's original pilot was made using cutout construction paper, and the show's creators just stuck with that look throughout the series. It was a labor-intensive process, but it worked pretty well on a budget. With that in mind, actual construction paper stopped playing a part in the animation process 20 years ago. By the time the second ever episode began production, everything was converted to digital. The closest the animators have come to using construction paper since then was the time they scanned every piece of pilot episode paper into a computer to use as reference. So we're basically seeing the same paper cutouts that we used when Cartman got an anal probe. Watch South Park enough and you'll begin to notice a lot of running jokes and stuff hidden in the background. Among the most enduring Easter eggs are the secret aliens in various episodes, hidden there by the animators. The phenomenon is so pervasive that there's a popular rumor that you can find an alien in the background of every episode ever aired, but that just isn't true. While there are a ton of hidden aliens, animators for the show have denied that they've gone as far as to hide one in every episode. Why? Well, mostly because the guy whose job it is to do it often forgets. Because of this, even the animators don't know exactly how many aliens are hidden throughout the series. Sorry, but the truth isn't always out there. Perhaps the biggest controversy in the show's history is when they attempted to include an image of Muhammad in a 2010 episode, simply titled 201. Ultimately, Comedy Central censored all mentions and depictions of the Prophet in the episode, prompting widespread criticism.
You see, I learned something today.
They even refused to rerun the episode, in addition to making it unavailable to view legally online or even to purchase on DVD in some countries. All of this was a surprise to show creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker, since Muhammad was shown uncensored in the 2001 episode Super Best Friends, and nobody gave a flying fart about it back then. The episode prominently features a number of religious figures as a band of godly superheroes, Muhammad included. He gets wicked sick flame powers and gets punched by a giant statue of Abraham Lincoln. The big difference is that Super Best Friends aired before 9/11, prior to a huge shift in the political climate of the US, and prior to a group called Revolution Muslim threatening Parker's and Stone's lives.
A warning by a radical Islamic group right here in America, right here in New York, that they will end up dead because of a cartoon.
To this day, you can't watch any Muhammad episode on South Park Studios' official site, including the 2001 episode. But you can see the Prophet in the opening credits of several seasons, hidden around an alien, the devil, and Scott Tenorman, the kid who ate his own parents in a bowl of chili. Consult with Urban Dictionary, preferably not with your parents around, and you'll see that the word derp is credited to the 1999 South Park episode, The Succubus.
If you like Chef, you're gonna love Mr. Derp. Oh, derp!
That credit isn't entirely correct though. While this episode helped popularize the word, it was actually in an earlier Parker and Stone project, the 1998 film Basketball. But it's not like Parker and Stone came up with the word either, since the word was likely coined by the writer and director of that film, David Zucker. You know, the guy who wrote Airplane. And that guy has given us nothing but classics.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Business review website Yelp doesn't really have the most positive reputation, mostly due to the idea that they allegedly extort small businesses in return for positive reviews. South Park riffed on these claims in the 2015 episode You're Not Yelping. Soon after the episode aired, news spread that Yelp had taken offense and that they were suing the show for $10 million. Stone and Parker stoked the flames of controversy by issuing a sarcastic response, giving the lawsuit claim 1 star. Except, Yelp never attempted to sue the show at all. The story about the alleged lawsuit came from a satirical website, and a lot of people who didn't read very closely passed it around as real news. Did you really think that an article written by a guy named Jimmy Rustling was serious news? Thanks for the forward, Grandma. But stick to not dying.
Creepy myths surround several classic horror films, and they can be just as scary as what you see on screen. There are movies that are supposedly cursed, and films that are apparently based on actual events. Here, we'll dispel some of the false facts to put your mind at ease. In the 2008 film The Strangers, a couple is tormented and tortured by a group of masked criminals in and around their vacation home. The Strangers made quite an impression upon its release, partly for the striking look of its masked intruders, but mostly for its central thesis that evil can be senseless and random. One aspect of the film significantly added to the horror. The Strangers was supposedly inspired by true events, a claim that was repeated in its more outlandish 2018 sequel, The Strangers Prey at Night. In both cases, this is a wildly misleading claim. Did someone wearing a spooky mask really terrorize a woman while a Joanna Newsom record skipped in the background? The long answer is no. Writer-director Brian Bertino says the story was inspired by something that happened to him as a child. One night, a stranger reportedly knocked on the door and asked for someone who didn't live there. It turns out that thieves were using this strategy to burglarize homes, as he explained to Collider in 2008.
And they were knocking on every door on the street with the idea that whoever didn't open the door, they would kick in the door and rob the place.
Bertino was also inspired by the Manson murders.
I was around, 11 or 12 years old. My dad gave me a book to read, and he gave me Helter Skelter, which was a very strange pick.
And those are the events that inspired The Strangers. True story. Ever since the original Poltergeist hit theaters in 1982, fans of the film have argued over who really directed the now classic supernatural thriller. Was it credited director Tobe Hooper or the film's co-writer and producer, Steven Spielberg? Some members of the cast and crew have said that Spielberg was so hands-on during filming that he ultimately deserves credit for directing the movie. But following Hooper's death in 2017, filmmaker Mick Garris set the record straight on his podcast Post Mortem. According to Garris, Spielberg was indeed a strong presence on the Poltergeist set, but that had more to do with the fact that this was Hooper's first big studio film. Plus, Spielberg is evidently just an enthusiastic guy when it comes to movies. Garris claims Spielberg may have occasionally jumped in when he wasn't needed, but he insists that at the end of the day, it's Hooper's vision you see on screen. As Garris said to producer and actress Caroline Williams,
Toby directed that movie. Steven Spielberg had a lot to do with directing
Thank you very much for stating that.
Garris claims Hooper did all the pre-production work and says he was always on set to yell action and cut. In fact, Spielberg himself reportedly acknowledged that Hooper ultimately directed the film.
Toby got credit because he deserved that credit, including Steven Spielberg said that.
Shouldn't that be enough to settle this once and for all? And since we're on the subject of Poltergeist, you've probably heard that the film is supposedly cursed. And this curse is apparently so powerful, it somehow extends to the film's increasingly terrible sequels. It's hard to say why evil forces would choose to lord over an entire trilogy of films, but the crew reportedly did use actual human skeletons in the first Poltergeist, so maybe that caused some sort of otherworldly ruckus? Frankly, we have our doubts, and so should you. As for what this supposed curse entails, there are various myths floating around. According to Snopes, an extreme version of the curse rumor asserts that everyone who appeared in these movies is now dead. Well, that is extreme, and also extremely untrue. We're sure Poltergeist stars Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams were startled to hear this news, seeing as they're both very much alive. But two major players in the Poltergeist franchise did suffer horrible fates in real life. Dominique Dunne, the actress who played the older sister in the first movie, was strangled to death by her boyfriend a few months after the film's release. Heather O'Rourke, the young actress who played Carol Ann in all three films, suddenly died from septic shock in 1988. These two tragic, unforeseen deaths are what really inspired the rumored curse, but the myth sometimes includes the death of actor Julian Beck, who played the fiendish Kane in Poltergeist 2: The Other Side, and who died from stomach cancer at the age of 60, 7 months before the film premiered. Sometimes the curse also involves the death of actress Zelda Rubinstein, who starred in all three Poltergeist films. But it's important to note that Rubinstein died of natural causes at the age of 76 and in the year 2010. That's a full 28 years after the original Poltergeist premiered. Not exactly the stuff terrifying curses are made of, is it? There are two surefire ways to entice moviegoers to see your horror film. You can claim your movie is based on actual events, or you can claim the production was cursed by dark, unseen forces. Or in the case of 1973's The Exorcist, you can do both.
Your mother's in here with his card. Would you like to leave a message? I see that she gets it.
The 1971 novel by William Peter Blatty was inspired by a supposed real-life exorcism that took place in 1949. The Washington Post even covered the story at the time, publishing an article with the grabby headline, "Priest Frees Mount Rainier Boy Reported Held in Devil's Grip." According to St. Louis Magazine, all sorts of freakish antics surrounded this reported possession. Objects flew, his bed shook, a heavy chair tilted, a rug slid across the room. His body was raked with red scratches, which seemed to appear spontaneously and sometimes spell out words or draw a devil's face. Of course, it's worth looking at the incident with a healthy degree of skepticism. Author Thomas Allen, who wrote Possessed, The True Story of an Exorcism, told St. Louis in 2014, "I've always felt it was something we don't yet understand about the way the body handles problems that have invaded it. I felt there had to be a rational explanation for what was causing that kid to be suffering." Meanwhile, Michael Cuneo, author of American Exorcism, told the magazine, "If I had been there, my hunch is that I would not have seen the things they reported." Because the filmmakers decided to explore these occult themes, many believe The Exorcist is a cursed film. According to the 13th Floor, the curse supposedly caused numerous on-set accidents. For example, the set used for the McNeil's home caught on fire, and only Reagan's room was left unharmed. Oh, and actress Ellen Burstyn injured her spine after she was thrown to the ground in a scene, according to the Huffington Post. Also, Linda Blair reportedly hurt her back when a piece of rigging broke. During post-production, 2 actors who died in the film, Jack McGowran and Vasilike Malarios, died in real life. Also, several relatives of people who starred in The Exorcist were reportedly hurt or killed while the film was being made. Meanwhile, some people believe the actual film stock was cursed, including the late evangelist Billy Graham, who always had the spooky stuff on his brain.
And I want to talk tonight about the devil and demons and witches and wizards.
Director William Friedkin told Entertainment Weekly that Billy Graham, who was not Catholic, denounced The Exorcist from the pulpit and said, "The devil is in every frame of this film." Now, how he examined every frame, I don't know. Of course, people get hurt all the time on and off movie sets. People pass away all the time too. That doesn't mean the film is cursed or haunted in any way. It's worth noting that Vasiliki Malarios was 89 years old at the time of her death. She died of natural causes, not supernatural causes. Marketing materials for 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre really wanted to convince viewers that the film was based on real-life events. One of the taglines even claimed, "What happened is true. Now the motion picture that's just as real." And the film opens with this grand announcement.
The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history.
The 2003 remake adopted the same strategy, with promotional posters proudly boasting that the film was inspired by a true story. So, is this tale actually based on terrible things that happened in real life? According to Snopes, that's a big ol' not really. The website points out that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on a true incident in 2 ways. For one thing, director Tobe Hooper knew a bit about Ed Gein, a real-life murderer and grave robber who made furniture out of skin and bone and who also inspired Psycho and Silence of the Lambs. Oh, and once Hooper imagined himself chainsawing his way out of a crowded department store, but haven't we all? That's it. That's the inspiration for the film and its remake. So don't let the grimy documentary feel of this 1974 classic convince you that you're watching a documentary. You aren't. The mysterious moose and its chalky undertaste. The ominous Tanis root pendant. The devil is truly in the details in 1968's Rosemary's Baby, a horror film about Satanism that's full of tantalizingly terrifying touches. Surely someone with a firm grasp on the black arts had to be on hand to advise the filmmakers, right?
That's not possible. That's a mistake.
Well, a popular myth about the film involves the late Anton LaVey, otherwise known as the founder of the Church of Satan. According to Vanity Fair, LaVey was falsely credited with working as a consultant on the film Rosemary's Baby. It's a myth that's endured for decades, and the story has grown over time. According to Criterion, one urban legend insists that Church of Satan bigwig Anton LaVey not only served as technical consultant on Rosemary's Baby, but also donned the hairy devil suit. The plot thickens. In fact, it's not at all unusual for publications to state this rumor as fact, such as when The Telegraph gleefully reported in 2018 that a breakthrough for LaVey seemed to come with Roman Polanski's film of Rosemary's Baby in 1968, where he played the devil himself. Some sources claim LaVey started the rumor himself, but is there any truth to the story? Sorry to say, the answer seems to be no. As the Washington Post reported in 1998, according to an interview with the original producer of the film Rosemary's Baby, LaVey was not technical advisor as he claimed, and not a single member of the cast or crew has ever mentioned LaVey's involvement. In fact, according to the Wall Street Journal, a little-known character actor named Clay Tanner actually played the role of the devil. So, that settles that. But even if LaVey did make up all these tall tales, his efforts might have been encouraged by Paramount Pictures. That is, if the Church of Satan can be believed, and that's a pretty big if. A post on the organization's official website claims that a lot of people like to attribute this legend to Anton LaVey. But in May of 1967, the publicist for Rosemary's Baby found Anton LaVey and his church and were very excited. They solicited his support for their efforts. So, if you're desperate to believe that LaVey was somehow involved with Rosemary's Baby, you can at least cling on to that little tidbit. If you close your eyes and think of Dracula, you probably see Bela Lugosi's slicked back hair and black cape and hear that hypnotic voice say,
I never drink. Why?
Such is the power of 1931's Dracula, one of the first talkie horror films. Dracula was a breakthrough role for Lugosi, and it turned him into a household name in America. To this day, many people believe the actor couldn't speak English during the making of the movie and therefore recited every line phonetically.
Van Helsing, a most distinguished scientist whose name we know, even in the wild Transylvania.
But no, as Legend Revealed explains, that simply isn't true. By the time he starred in the film, Lugosi had already been playing Count Dracula on stage for several years, and he spoke English as well as he ever would. However, he did speak his lines phonetically in The Red Poppy, his 1922 Broadway debut. Perhaps that's where this rumor got started, even though the two projects were nearly a decade apart. Universal Studios' 1931 film Frankenstein is one of the all-time classics of the horror genre. You probably know the characters' names by heart. There's Dr. Frankenstein, and of course, his trusty hunchback assistant, Igor, right? The iconic Igor character was famously spoofed in 1974's Young Frankenstein with the character Igor, portrayed by Marty Feldman.
Dr. Frankenstein.
The character also inspired the 2008 animated feature, Igor. But here's the interesting thing. There is no Igor in the classic Universal Frankenstein film. Dr. Frankenstein did have a hunchback assistant played by Dwight Frye, but his name was Fritz. However, Dr. Frankenstein has an assistant named Igor in the sequel films Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein. But wait, as you can see, Igor wasn't hunchbacked, though he still had some pretty serious physical issues.
You see that? They hanged me once.
So how did the name Igor become forever associated with the image of a hunchbacked assistant? According to Dr. M's Frankenblog, mass misremembering may be the culprit for its popularity. If that's true, the idea of Igor the hunchbacked assistant is likely the result of filmgoers collectively confusing and recombining Fritz, Igor, and a number of other hunchback assistants from B-movies like 1944's The House of Frankenstein. Over time, this enduring archetype was born. That's our hunch, anyway.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Game of Thrones is a whirlwind of a ride. You can't watch the show without getting caught up in the storm. But in between all the characters with scruffy brown beards and greasy brown locks, there are a lot of things people get wrong about Game of Thrones. Here are some of the worst ones. At the end of Season 1, we watched Daenerys Targaryen walk into her husband's funeral pyre and emerge as the unburnt mother of dragons. Then, a few seasons later, she did it again, emerging naked from the fiery remains of a temple, thus confirming what we already knew: Targaryens are immune to fire. However, author George R.R. Martin himself has a bone to pick with that depiction. As he wrote during a fan chat in 1999, Targaryens are not immune to fire. The birth of Dany's dragons was unique, magical, wondrous, a miracle. She is called the Unburnt because she walked into the flames and lived, but her brother sure as hell wasn't immune to that molten gold. On the other hand, Daenerys herself, at least on the show, does appear to have some tolerance to heat. We saw this early on when her maid warned her against getting into a too hot bathtub and she did it anyway. But that's hardly the same thing as walking into a fire and emerging unscathed. We have yet to actually learn what's behind her apparent immunity to the flames, whether it's some kind of magic, a bond with her dragons, or something else. Regardless, it's certainly not an immunity that applies to all Targaryens. Melisandre's relationship with Stannis was nothing if not irritating. She was constantly whispering in his ear, winning him over with flattery and being a complete witch to his lawfully wedded wife. But how much control did Melisandre really have over Stannis? Which one of them was really in charge? Stannis believed that Melisandre could help him win the Iron Throne, but he wasn't playing the game because Melisandre wanted him to. Remember, this is a man who believed so completely in his right to be king that he agreed to burn his own daughter to death in the hope that his act of sacrifice would help secure his throne. In a way, Melisandre was his puppet, not the other way around. After all, she genuinely believed he was a prophesied prince who was promised, and she'd have done just about anything to help him fulfill the prophecy. But every choice Stannis made was meant to further his own interests, not Melisandre's. He might have let her think she was pulling the strings, but that's a small price to pay for having someone on your side who can throw fireballs and produce murderous shadow babies from her nether pits. Okay, take a couple of deep breaths and sit down. This one is going to make you question everything you've ever seen, heard, or believed about life, the universe, and your place in it. Daenerys' title is actually not pronounced Khaleesi. You might be wondering how that's possible when the show seems to have plenty of examples proving otherwise. Well, they've all been getting it wrong. The Dothraki language was created by a linguist named David Peterson, so he would sure know what his own language sounds like. He says the correct pronunciation of Khaleesi is...
The native Dothraki pronunciation is Khaleesi.
Peterson says that his pronunciation is the only way that Martin's original spelling makes sense, while also abiding by linguistic principles. Unfortunately, the constant mispronouncing of the name on the show and in pop culture has led Peterson to regret some things. He says that if he could do it again, he would have changed it to avoid the possibility of mispronunciation.
So I should have just respelled it on my own and just said that the word is pronounced Khaleesi.
After all those years of The Walking Dead, every time we hear the phrase White Walkers, we expect the characters in Game of Thrones to stumble out of Westeros and into Georgia, which would be a fun crossover, except the White Walkers aren't technically zombies. They're an ancient race of ice creatures created by the children of the forest during a violent ritual. As for their more undead servants, Whites, they actually are raised from the dead by White Walkers. However, only the Night King seems to have the ability to turn humans into White Walkers, and seemingly only infants. Game of Thrones featured more than a few characters making seemingly instantaneous trips around Westeros. So you might be tempted to think that Westeros just isn't very big, but that's not actually true. Westeros is huge. Granted, it's easier for Daenerys to get around because she's got dragons to ride, but for everyone else, not so much. There are 1,500 miles between Winterfell and King's Landing, and the journey takes more than 1 month by horse. That means that the distance between Winterfell and King's Landing is just a little further than the distance between Vancouver, British Columbia, and San Diego. And you can add another 600 miles on top of that to get to the wall. So we're not talking about a small nation, we're talking about something that's comparable to a good chunk of the United States. And unless you're lucky enough to have a dragon, there is an awful lot of distance between you and pretty much every one of the 7 kingdoms. There are plenty of characters in Game of Thrones, and we're sure not going to count all of them. As of 2016, there were 553 cast members. That includes speaking parts and minor parts like Woman in King's Landing and Giant White No. 2, but not any of the thousands of extras. But the real problem is that there are so many core characters that even a mega fan would be hard-pressed to name every single one of them. So no one really gets that much screen time, and that's led a lot of people to conclude that Game of Thrones doesn't really have a protagonist. However, mathematicians took that assumption to be a challenge. In 2016, a couple of mathematicians used network science to study the connections between characters. They concluded that Game of Thrones does have a protagonist, and it's Tyrion Lannister. And their weird mathematical map isn't the only analytical tool that came to that conclusion. In 2017, someone went through the first 6 seasons of Game of Thrones and figured out that Tyrion gets the most screen time too. By the last episode of Season 6, he'd racked up 4 hours and 53 minutes, about a half hour more than Jon Snow. There's also the parts where pretty much everything that's ever happened on Game of Thrones can somehow be traced back to Tyrion. And finally, Tyrion is George R.R. Martin's favorite character, so that's proof enough. Some of the costumes on Game of Thrones are works of art. According to The New Yorker, the principal embroiderer spends 6 days a week, 12 hours a day just working on the embellishments for the gowns, robes, and tunics that appear on the show. Some of the other costumes, though, like the robes worn by the Night's Watch, look just a little bit worse for wear. In fact, as befits the Night's Watch in general, they look a little shabby. Wondering why? In a 2016 talk at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, costume designer Michelle Clapton revealed the true origins of Jon Snow's cloak and some of the other fur robes worn on the show.
These capes are actually IKEA rugs. We cut and we shaved them, and then we added strong leather straps.
She doesn't mention which IKEA rugs she used, in case you wanted to build your own Jon Snow cosplay. However, popular guesses include the $15 Tajin, the $30 Wrens, and the $79 Scold, which you can only get from IKEA Australia. Happy shopping!
You can't believe everything you see in the movies. Here are some of the ballsiest lies movies told us about science. Lasers are the de facto sci-fi weapon, revered for their ability to make things disintegrate and also because they come in lots of different cool colors. Or at least that's what we've been taught by our favorite movies.
They played us like a damn fiddle!
In reality, our beloved sci-fi movies have been deceiving us since movie aliens first descended from Mars and pointed their weapons at helpless Earthlings. And although they're based on a real technology, the sad truth is that lasers are really boring. According to How Stuff Works, to make a laser beam visible, you have to put particles in its path, just like any beam of light. You'll see the same effect with a regular flashlight. In real life, unless the Enterprise is flying through a cloud of space dust, those cool space battles would be nothing but invisible lasers. Lame. We have established that you can't see laser beams in space, and we're all pretty bummed about that. And because we haven't pooped on enough parties yet, let's go one further and say that you can't actually hear laser beams in space either.
So who are you, man?
I'm the party pooper.
So not only do laser weapons not go pew pew pew, you also won't hear any giant booming sounds when things explode, and you won't hear that awesome woo 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 sound as the TARDIS travels across time and space. That's because there isn't any air in space, and sound needs air to travel. Because sound is basically just our interpretation of vibrations made by various objects, like vocal cords, footsteps, or lasers that make pew-pew sounds, and because there's no air in space for the sound waves to travel through, there's nothing to pick up those vibrations and move them along. So, no sound, no booming explosions, and no pew-pew-pew. Space is turning out to be a really disappointing place.
I'm in space.
I know you are, mate. Yeah. We're both in space.
Remember that moment in the first Jurassic Park movie when the camera descends upon the piece of amber with the mosquito trapped inside it and the world has a collective aha moment where we realize that all the information we need to resurrect extinct species might lie within a 150 million year old wad of tree sap? It's just a fantasy, not unlike the fantasy that Newman from Seinfeld might finally get his comeuppance from a venom-spewing Jurassic jungle lizard. Says who? Says scientists who can't even find DNA in 60-year-old copal, which is the sub-fossilized pre-amber version of amber. According to Sci News, a team of researchers at Manchester University used sensitive next-generation methods to try and extract DNA from insects preserved in copal, and they failed, miserably. Which, if you've seen the movies, you'll know is actually a good thing.
Mr. Hammond, I think we're back in business.
When movie bad guys want to capture someone alive, they soak a piece of cloth in chloroform, put it over their victim's nose and mouth, and within seconds that person has collapsed. But if it were that easy to knock someone out with chloroform, don't you think every evil jerk would be doing it? According to technology.org, the reason there isn't an epidemic of chloroform-related kidnappings is because it actually takes a really, really long time for chloroform to knock someone out.
Oh, we all got chloroformed.
Somebody chloroformed all of us.
This particular myth does have some basis in fact. During the early 20th century, chloroform was used as an anesthetic, which means criminals could easily obtain it. But for the average would-be kidnapper, chloroform is not really a very effective tool because it can actually take up to 5 minutes to incapacitate a healthy adult. So as take-them-alive weapons go, not really very efficient. Who among us hasn't dreamed that a good thwack on the noggin will one day erase all memory of that really embarrassing thing we did 6 years ago at the Christmas party?
Hello. Who are you?
Ron Weasley.
Really?
And, who am I?
One of the most famous Hollywood amnesia victims is Jason Bourne from the Bourne Identity films, who forgot his entire life after a near-drowning experience. Well, if all this scientific myth-busting hasn't messed you up enough, Neuro-Sci-Fi would also like you to know that in real life, brain damage usually doesn't lead to retrograde amnesia, the kind where you forget your past. Some brain injuries do, however, cause the anterograde type, where you can remember your past but you can't remember stuff that has happened to you since the accident. And if someone does experience severe retrograde amnesia like Jason Bourne's, there's almost always anterograde amnesia too. Sorry, Jason, you may have the upper hand when it comes to beating bad guys to mush with coffee table books, but you can't beat science.